On today's Locked On Giants podcast, mandatory minicamp day one is in the books, and I've got some takeaways for you coming your way next. Again, here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you, as always, for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year. All right, Giant fans, day one of mandatory minicamp is in the books. I was there, had some notes that I took, some takeaways, some thoughts, and I'm going to go through all that with you on today's episode. So welcome on in and let's get right into it. All right. Some quick takeaways. One of the biggest differences with the format of the first day of mandatory minicamp is that we had only one 7-on-7 drill or period, I should say, and we had more 11-on-11s. So they had 4 11-on-11s versus just one 7-on-7. So why is that significant? Because this camp, even though I asked Brian Dable about it, and he basically said, well, yeah, we're going to continue to teach. Well, they're always teaching, the coaches. That's really nothing new. But the thing about this camp was that we saw more of the things that they've been installing all spring kind of come together as far as, okay, what really works? What are we going to maybe keep when we get to the summertime? What are we going to throw out? So they just focused more on the team drills. And in between, you had, a couple special teams periods. You had some, in the beginning of the practice, you had your individual unit stuff and whatnot, but just more of a focus on the team stuff. And look, I don't have to tell you guys that the last couple of years in particular, the Giants have come out of the gate and they've been slow to come out of the gate. They've looked like they haven't been polished. And it's interesting because last year, throughout the spring, they did more 11-on-11 than they did this year. This year it was more of a balance during the OTAs of 7-on-7s versus 11-on-11s, and that was, I think, as I mentioned maybe for last week when I talked about the OTA, Russell Wilson actually suggested they do more 7-on-7 to slow things down a little bit, because one of the problems I think that popped up that contributed to the slow start is that guys didn't know what they were doing. Because if you think about it, right now, during the spring, you don't have all the guys on the field. You've got guys that you're holding out for whatever reason. Maybe they're injured. Maybe they're rehabbing from something. For example, Andrew Thomas hasn't practiced all spring. Bobby Okereke has missed the last several practices. Dexter Lawrence hasn't really done much with the team drills. So by doing the 7-on-7s, you're kind of taking a step back and you're slowing things down so that guys get used to it, so that when you do more 11-on-11, you can hit the ground running. So that was one of the big differences in terms of the practices and how that was set up. Let's talk about some injuries. I mentioned Bobby Okereke. He hasn't worked for the last, I don't know how many practices now. I want to say 3. Guys also who haven't worked, and there's been a bunch. We know about Malik Neighbors with the toe. 2 rookies in particular have not worked in the spring, at least not during the OTAs that I can remember. And that's Darius Alexander, the 3rd-round pick, and Cam Scadaboo. And, I don't want to be an alarmist, but anytime a rookie misses the type of reps that these guys are missing, I think it's going to hurt. They're going to come out of the gate slowly. Um, this is valuable teaching time, learning time, whatever you want to call it. And these guys, I don't know what their injuries are. Brian Dable doesn't want to talk about, who's got what and, what the status is and all that stuff. But suffice it to say, I'm a little concerned about those two because Alexander has not worked really all spring. Scadaboo, who, by the way, still hasn't signed his contract, he hasn't worked the last several practices either. And I'm told that, that's not the reason why he's not out there practicing, that he signed a waiver, which if a rookie doesn't have a contract by the time the OTAs roll around and the mandatory minicamp, as long as they sign a waiver, they can participate in the practices. So if they don't have a signed waiver, they cannot set foot on the field at all. So it's my understanding that he signed a waiver, but what's keeping him off the field is some kind of injury. And I don't know what it is. Again, Dable wouldn't say what it is. And, all I know is that they're missing some valuable practice time. Jalen Hyatt, who has been having a really, really good spring, unfortunately, he got injured today. Something happened with his left leg. It happened early in the practice. He went through a drill and then suddenly went over to a trainer, went down on the ground. The trainer started stretching out his left leg. Hyatt got up, went to Dable, and that was all she wrote for him. So that's something to keep an eye on. You don't want to see guys pulling hamstrings or whatever it was he pulled this late in the summer because training camp will be here fairly quickly. Another 6 weeks, it will be here. And if it's a hamstring, and again, I don't know what it is, but if it's a hamstring, there's some question as to whether or not he'll be able to hit the ground running. Okay, so, the injuries, staying with the injuries for a moment, what's interesting about this is that, Brian Dable always says that different guys are at different spots or different places in their rehab from injury. So you would think that guys, if a veteran is coming off of an injury, maybe he'd be held out because, obviously he knows what he's doing. So what put him out there? But I find it interesting that of the veterans that are practicing, John Runyon Jr. returned to practice after missing, a couple of practices earlier on. So he's been practicing, coming off of the shoulder and the ankle issues that he had last year. Another guy who's been practicing is Theo Johnson, who had the season-ending foot injury. And I believe that was an injury he needed surgery for. So he's been able to get out there and practice. Andrew Thomas, who also had a season-ending foot injury, has not. I get it, different guys, different types of injuries, maybe different severities. I don't know if they had the same procedures. And as I've said before, we kind of know what Andrew Thomas can do, whereas Theo Johnson, this is his second year. I'm sure he didn't want to sit on the side and, take anything for granted or whatnot. But I just find it kind of interesting that, again, from what I remember, you didn't see guys come back that missed earlier in the spring. So this year you're seeing it. It could mean that they have a bigger sense of urgency. I don't know the answer, but I just thought that was kind of interesting, just, to see that. And, when I see guys like Bobby Okereke, who had the back issue, and they pull him back from practice. Well, I always remember how last year, Evan Neal, he practiced in the beginning and they pulled him back, and we all know how that worked out. Now, I'm not saying, I don't want to be an alarmist. I'm not saying that Bobby Okereke had a setback or any of these guys had a setback. It's just something to keep an eye on as, once we get to training camp. So I just wanted to put that out there. All right, I got a lot more for you coming up, including who looked good. We'll talk about Evan Neal. I've got some clips from the assistant coaches session that we had today. All that's coming up. Don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so that you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long term goals. Since I've started using Monarch Money, I've had a better handle on where my earnings go, and I've been able to better budget my monthly spending. So go on and take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use promo code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com, and that promo code is LOCKEDONNFL to get 50% off your first year. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we still got some stuff to do here on the Locked On Giants podcast. We've got Minicamp wrap up, day 2, of course, is coming. So I'm going to give you kind of like a wrap up of the spring instead of a day 2 report. And the reason for that is day 2 is going to be more or less an hour-long practice, which means it's probably going to be a walkthrough. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot to take away from that, but I'm going to kind of give you like a spring wrap up. And then we've got more stuff coming up the rest of the week here on Locked On Giants. Hope you will check it out. All right, let's get back to day 1 and some observations. This is interesting. There's competition, but yet there's not competition. Jobs are not won or lost during the spring, but yet there just seems to be some little battles that are kind of having their stages set, if you will. I've mentioned Cordell Flott and Deonte Banks. The two of them are splitting reps at the first team cornerback. All right, Paulson Adebo is locked in. He's good to go. But Flott and Banks have been alternating first team reps. So I do think at the end of the day, it's going to be Banks. I think that's how they want it to be. I just find it interesting that they're really, having this like stage competition, if you will. And who knows, maybe Flott will outplay Banks. I don't know, but they've been saying all the right things about Banks, how well he's taken to it, how locked in he is, and all that good stuff. But yet he's being pushed for the job. And look, there's nothing wrong with competition, especially in this case, but it's just something to keep an eye on, something to put in my notebook. I have it in my notebook for the summer, something to keep an eye on. All right, another competition that I think is brewing, and I didn't really think this would happen, but it is. I think there might be a competition at kicker. So Graham Gano and Jude McIntyre have been, getting their share of reps. I think Gano had 4 kicks, field goal attempts today, and McIntyre had 3. And Gano made all 4. McIntyre made all 3. I couldn't tell the distance because they were all the way on the other end of the field, but they usually do them like they start at like 30 and then they go 40, 50, and they move it back, every so many yards. What kind of stood out though about this is normally you would say, okay, well maybe McIntyre is taking some of the load off of Graham Gano. I don't think that's the case, if I'm being honest with you, because look, Gano's coming off an injury. I get that. But it's not like this is a game where, they're saying, oh, okay, it's preseason. Graham, go take a seat. Don't worry about it. You want Gano to be kicking. You want him to regain his form and be comfortable and look like the Graham Gano of old. But yet, you've got McIntyre in there, and he's doing some of the kicking too. And you're like, is there a competition here? And there very well could be. There very well could be, because as I pointed out to you on the show before, Gano the last 2 years, and I get it, he's been injured, but his long distance ball has kind of fell off a little bit. So McIntyre, what's interesting, I was watching the two of them kick today, and McIntyre, when he hits the ball, you hear that thump, that thud of the ball, and he just quick gets it up and on its way. Not so much with Gano. Gano gives it a little thud, but it's not quite as audible as McIntyre when he kicks it. And it just seems to me that, at least today, based on what I was watching today, it looked like the ball was coming off of Gano's foot a little slower, if you will. So that's something to keep an eye on. Again, we talked to special teams coordinator Michael Gabriel a couple weeks ago, and he said, "Oh yeah, Gano looks like the Gano of old." And yeah, the accuracy's been there. He hasn't really missed any field goals, I don't think, off the top of my head, of the practices that we've been at. But I think there might be a competition there that's brewing that nobody's willing to admit. I don't think this is a case, like I said, of McAtee just, taking some of the load off. And, I don't know who's going to end up winning it. I would think it's probably going to be Gano, but just something to keep an eye on there. All right, another competition is backup left tackle. Now, Joshua Zudu tried that role the last couple of years, didn't really work out. So the Giants brought in Stone Forsythe and Brian Hudson. And what's kind of interesting about this one, Stone Forsythe, I think, is more of a right tackle. I don't know that he's necessarily a good fit for the left side. But right now, again, when it comes to offensive line, you can't really tell a whole lot because they're not in pads. There's no contact allowed. But if I had to pick one of those two guys, I would say that maybe Hudson's a little more ahead of Forsythe in that battle. Because look, for offensive tackle, they're going to have Marcus Bowe. He'll probably make the team. He'll be one of the backup tackles. He's been working on the right, and I've also seen him take a couple of snaps on the left. They're not going to keep all three of those guys. They're not going to keep Hudson, Forsythe, and Bowe. I just don't think that happens. So it's early, but it looks like Hudson maybe has a leg up on this competition, on the swing tackle competition. That doesn't mean that Bowe is going to end up on the practice squad. He's looked pretty good, in the drills, the individual drills. But just, I think there's a competition certainly starting to take shape there. All right, let me talk now about Evan Neal. Now, Evan Neal, obviously, one of the questions that I had, and I told you I was going to get with Carmen Brasillo, I was going to get in that little huddle, and I did. I stayed in that huddle. I asked Carmen Brasillo about Evan Neal, and I'm going to play a clip for you. Actually, 3 clips I'm going to play for you from that pertain to Evan Neal, stuff that I asked, and one question that I had on my mind, but somebody beat me to. But my main question was, has Evan Neal been playing strictly on the left, or have they moved him at times to right guard? Because my theory is they're grooming him for left guard to put him next to Andrew Thomas. And not only because of that, but because Evan Neal has played left guard in college. So I thought maybe it was a comfort thing, put him back there, let him go where he's comfortable instead of forcing him to learn it on the right side. And he's been taking a lot of his snaps, at least when we have been in the building, on the left side. So I asked Carmen Brasillo about it. And like I said, there were a couple of other questions regarding the challenges of moving inside, which I asked him about as well, keeping in mind what Greg Van Roten said, and then the footwork issue and how much that changes when he moves it inside in terms of what Brasillo is looking for. So let me play that clip for you right now.
I mean, I think initially when we had done it, his familiarity of having played left guard when he was at Alabama, so there's probably a goal for that of, okay, hey, we'll make it a switch. Let's go ahead and feel comfortable to that. But he's now played both sides and he'll continue to play both sides. I think so much is pre-snap, training your eyes and getting used to what can indicate something's going to change, whether it's when you're playing tackle and you spend time there, a lot of times it's off the edges and it's safety rotations versus where your eyes need to be when you're playing guard and how things might change. Might be relying upon the lineman's alignment or a linebacker's alignment. So just I think training your eyes and the reaction, your rules will change to some extent. So just getting used to what your responses are when the pitcher changes.
Carm, what about his footwork working inside? He's not going up against, to use Greg Van Roten's quote, big guys, slow guys. They're more athletic now inside. So how's Evan, adjusting with his footwork inside?
We don't change a whole lot as far as, I would say, I guess, the set angles that you would employ more often than not might be a little different at guard versus tackle. But otherwise, the core fundamentals of offensive line play, at least for myself, don't differ a whole lot except for set angles, I would say. So.
All right, everybody. That was Carmen Brasillo, offensive line coach, about Evan Neal. I told you I was going to get with him, and I did. And again, I just wonder if the Giants are hoping for an offensive line, an interior offensive line of Evan Neal at left guard, John Michael Schmitz at center, John Runyon Jr. at right guard. That would, of course, free up Greg Van Roten to be the swing guard / center. So that's something, obviously, we're all going to keep an eye on. Right now, again, you can't really tell a whole lot because they're not in pads. There's no contact. But, you have a rough idea of where guys are working. And it's just been my experience that when a guy works almost exclusively on one side, that's usually where he's going to end up playing. And, even though Brasillo said, oh, we've been flipping him, putting him on the other side, most of the reps that I've seen him at have been on the left side. So we'll see if that holds true once we get to training camp. All right, folks, I got a whole lot more coming up for you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I've got some takeaways from day one of Giants minicamp, mandatory minicamp. And again, reminder, day 2 is on Wednesday. It's going to be more of a or less a walkthrough. Not expecting a whole lot, but we will do a show. We'll do kind of a wrap up, a reflection on the spring. And then later this week, I hope to have a guest on. It'll probably be Brandon Olson. Brandon's actually been with me at the camps and the OTAs this spring. So we'll kind of bounce off some ideas of what we've seen and talk about some of the things in the direction that this team is headed for the summer. So that'll be coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, got a few more things that I want to talk about. Abdul Carter, my gosh, I can't say enough about this young man. They line him up everywhere. Outside, on 4-eye, inside linebacker. He's all over the place. And the thing about Abdul Carter, and we saw this a lot with the 11-on-11 drills, he is so fast off that snap. I mean, before an offensive lineman even gets out of his stance, Abdul Carter is past the guy. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, well, gosh, does that mean the offensive line is not very good if Abdul Carter is living in the backfield? Not necessarily. Remember, there's no contact, and offensive linemen cannot really block guys. They can try to get in the way, but they can't block guys. But see, here's the thing. You've got Abdul Carter, who was so quick off the snap. I mean, his first step reminds me of O.C. Umenyiora's back in the day. O.C. had that first quick step when the ball was snapped. I mean, he would often be in the backfield before the guy that was supposed to block him knew what was coming. So that's what Abdul Carter reminds me of, or who he reminds me of. And then, you throw in Brian Burns, who looks very quick off the snap, Kayvon Thibodeau, who was locked in and focused. And my gosh, that pass rush, it's going to be something to watch. If they are all healthy, that pass rush is going to be pretty scary if you are an opposing quarterback, an opposing offensive lineman. So, I can't say enough about Abdul Carter and the spring he's had. He's come in businesslike. He's done his thing. And just wait till the pads go on. I'm very much looking forward to that, seeing what he looks like once the pads go on. And if he still, penetrates into the offensive backfield, because he is, especially when he's gone up against Jackson Dart, a younger quarterback, that has caused Dart to kind of hesitate a little bit or rush a throw. Even, with Winston and Wilson, I haven't seen it as much, but basically what he's done is he's moved them off their spots. So a lot of good things for this pass rush. I am so excited about it. and excited to see once the pads go on. All right, couple of other like quick thoughts for you. I was watching defensive line drills today. Dexter Lawrence was able to go through it. He didn't participate in the 11 on 11 stuff, but Dexter did team drills. And, Dexter's the first one in the unit drills where, they line them up according to, I guess, seniority. So it's Dexter, Raheem Nunez Roches, and you have like Jordan Riley, DJ Davidson, Elijah Chapman, Elijah Garcia, and then the rest of them. And, I'm just watching these drills, which include basically agility drills. And Dexter is just, he's like a ballerina out there, for lack of a better term. He just, his footwork is just so pristine and so precise. But one guy who I just kept going back to, and it's interesting because when I ultimately do a 53-man roster projection, I got to be honest with you, I want to include this guy on the roster. I'm not sure if he's going to make it, given the veterans that they added. Roy Robertson Harris, I think is going to obviously make it. I suspect Jeremiah Ledbetter will make it. And I don't know that they're going to keep a whole lot of, defensive linemen. I think maybe they keep 5. And, you can figure Darius Alexander is going to be one of the 5. But I really hope they find a spot for Elijah Chapman. Because, I'm standing there and I'm watching him go through these drills. And his agility movement was almost as pristine as Dexter Lawrence's. And I'm saying to myself, they got to find a spot for this guy. Even if they, use him on special teams or maybe even use him as a fullback. I know he's not a very big guy compared to his fellow defensive linemen, but he's so underrated, I think. And I just found myself kind of rooting for him to make this team. I don't know that he will, given the numbers, but I really hope they find a spot for him because, like I said, his footwork and his agility and going through the drills, I mean, he was getting, praised by assistant defensive line coach Brian Cox and defensive line coach Dre Patterson. So really a lot to like there with the defensive line, the depth, the competition that's going to be there, going to be something to watch. All right. One final thought. I'll talk about the quarterbacks. Obviously, a big theme from the media all spring long has been about Russell Wilson. The leadership, what does he bring? What's he like? What kind of pass does he throw? And all that other good stuff. I was watching the quarterbacks do a throwing drill. Basically, it was a 10-yard pass that they were throwing. And what they had to do is they had to take a snap from a staff member who served as the center, drop back, and you had Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach, was kind of pointing, saying, go back, go this way, go left, go right. He was pointing to each guy. And then he would say, okay, throw. And they would throw the ball to a staffer, the same guy who snapped the ball to them. And one thing I took a note of was the velocity of each pass, each quarterback's pass. So by that, I mean, when Jackson Dart threw his, it hit the staffer's hands and boom, you heard a thud, a loud thud. When Jameis Winston threw his, you heard a loud thud. Same with Tommy DeVito. Not so much, though, with Russell Wilson. And I go back to what Wan'Dale Robinson said about Russell Wilson and the type of ball he throws. He said he throws it so it's catchable and it's like a pillow. And I thought to myself initially, okay, that's a good thing, right? Now I'm saying to myself, well, is it really a good thing? Because if the ball doesn't have zip when it needs to have zip, could the ball maybe be knocked away? Could it be picked off? That would be something to keep an eye on in the summertime. Now, look, Russell Wilson, he's going to be the starter. There's no question about that, unless, he's not healthy. But I just I like to watch how the ball comes out of a quarterback's hand, and if it's hitting the receiver's hands with a thud or what. Now, sometimes, you think of the hands and you can say, well, the receiver has soft hands, but remember, we're talking staffers here. So staffers are going to have probably stiffer hands, if you will. And again, it was the velocity, just watching the ball. How quickly was it coming out and how quickly was it getting to the target? And it's just something to keep an eye on. There's a lot to keep an eye on as we wrap up the spring and as we head into the summer training camp, which starts next month. But overall, I would say, day one of the mandatory mini camp, there was a lot to like. I mean, it wasn't perfect. There were some mistakes, some that, were obvious that you saw, some penalties, some passes that probably should have been completed, especially in the corner of the end zone. One of the problems the receivers were having is they weren't quite managing to stay in bounds. So that's something they're definitely going to have to work on. But overall, a lot to like about this team, what we have seen so far in the spring. I'm optimistic. I'm looking forward to seeing when the pads go on and seeing them also in the preseason. That's when we're really going to know for sure if what we've been seeing in the spring was just a mirage or is it the real thing. I think it's the real thing. I'm excited about it. I'm excited to bring it to you when we get back for training camp. But of course, I'll have shows well before that. I'm not going away, even though spring football is wrapping up. So I hope you will keep it here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, tomorrow we'll have a wrap up of the spring, some thoughts. I'll have a guest for you probably for the show after that. So make sure you keep it here. That's going to do it for me. Thank you, Giant fans, for tuning in, and I'll see you tomorrow.